Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Stephanie and I appreciate y'all stopping by. Today I have for you 6 farmhouse style thrift flips, and most of these are interchangeable for every season and holiday. Here's a quick look at all 6 items I thrifted and will be flipping in this video. I hope y'all enjoy the video, and if you do, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Let's go ahead and jump into the first project. I found this metal birdcage at a local thrift store for $3.50 and started by cleaning it up with some soap and water. I decided I did not like the ivy vines that went around the birdcage, so I took some wire pliers and some wire cutters and carefully removed them without cutting into the cage wire. I cut the vines off as close to the cage wire as possible without actually cutting into the cage. Once I had the vines removed, I took a Dremel tool with a grinding wheel attachment and used it to smooth out the sharp protruding areas left by the vines. Here is how the birdcage looked once I had all the vines removed and the wires smoothed down. Next, I took it outside and gave it 2 coats of Krylon Fusion spray paint in the color Gloss White. After the paint was completely dry, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and a small sponge pouncer brush to randomly distress areas around the birdcage to give it a vintage look and feel. I tried not to get too uniform with the paint marks so that it would look a little more authentic. Not only did I put the distressing on the outside of the birdcage, but I also made sure to add some to the inside of the cage and on the little bird swing. Once I was happy with the distressing, I added a little owl to the swing and some winter florals for this winter, and this one was finished. I love how this one turned out and love that I can change out the little birds and florals for all the holidays and seasons. Here is a look at the before and after photos of this one. Quickly moving on to project number 2. I found one of these vintage matchstick holders at a local flea market and just knew that I had to have it and exactly what I was going to do with it. There was no way in this world that I was going to ruin the finish on this piece with paint, so I decided my best option was to just clean it up really well to remove all the dust and residue that had built up over the years. Once I had it good and clean, I cut some small pieces of the soft floral foam from Dollar Tree and placed it in the bottom of the matchstick holder. I did not want to use any hot glue to hold it in place, so I added a few more small pieces of foam so that it was nice and snug. To decorate this piece for this winter season, I used one of these Let It Snow picks and one of these white snowy picks that I picked up for 60% off at Hobby Lobby. I removed the 3 wooden pieces from the Let It Snow pick and wanted to age them a little bit. I started by using a sanding sponge and sanded off all the glitter on all 3 pieces. I wasn't too worried if some of the white paint sanded off and the raw wood was showing, since it only added to the distressed look of the pieces. Next, I took some Krylon Chalky Finish antiquing wax in the color Dark Vintage and a coarse paintbrush and went around the front and back edges of all 3 wood pieces to distress them a little bit more. Once I had the wax brushed onto the wood, I took a paper towel and wiped off any excess. Here is how all 3 pieces looked once I had them distressed. I cut both picks apart so that I could build up the arrangement inside the matchstick holder. When I'm working with floral picks, I like to separate the pieces and organize them with like pieces. I find this makes the process go much easier and faster. I mixed the pieces of both of the picks and arranged them in the back of the matchstick holder until I was happy with the fullness and look of the arrangement. Once I had the florals in place, I took the 2 wooden leaves and put them in the back of the holder, then took the Let It Snow tag and placed it in the bottom opening of the holder. Next, I took some more pieces of the white floral and cut it down so that I could have smaller pieces to place in the front of the holder. I also took some random greenery I had left in my stash and added them to the bottom as well. I then added the 2 small pine cones from the Let It Snow pick to the bottom of the holder and 2 of the larger pine cones to the top of the holder. I thought the bottom looked a little bare, so I took some white berries and added 2 pieces to the bottom as an extra filler. Since this is a matchstick holder, I thought it was only appropriate to add some matches as the finishing touch to this project. I took 5 of the large barbecue matches and cut them down so that they would be at varying lengths and added 3 to the top of the holder and 2 to the bottom, and this one is finished. Y'all, this one turned out so cute. I absolutely love it, and I think the matches add that little pop of color that really sets this piece off. I cannot wait to decorate it with some yellow florals for this spring. Here is a look at the before and after of the matchstick holder. Let's move on to project number 3. I found this tall black metal tea light candle holder at a local thrift store for $1.50 and thought it would make a perfect mini wreath holder for an entryway table. I started by cleaning up the piece really well to remove any dust and grime. I then used a pair of wire cutters to cut off the top of the piece where the tea light candle is supposed to sit. I made sure to cut it long enough so that it would leave a little hook on the end of the stand. Next, I took a Dremel tool with a grinding attachment and smoothed out the top of the hanger so that it wasn't sharp. I used Krylon Fusion spray paint in the color gloss white and gave the hanger 2 good coats. Once the paint was completely dry, I took a sanding sponge and sanded the hanger to distress it so that some of the original color was showing. This gives the piece somewhat of an enamelware look that is so popular in farmhouse decor. I continued sanding on the piece until I was happy with the way it looked, and this thrift flip is complete. I decided I needed a mini wreath to hang on the hanger, so I took one of the small wreath forms from Dollar Tree as well as 2 of the microfiber dust and mop heads from Dollar Tree and made one. I started by folding the mop heads in half and cutting them so that I would have 4 equal pieces. After I had them cut, I placed the wreath form with the rounded side facing down on top of one piece of the mop head and used hot glue to secure it to the wreath form. I placed the hot glue along one edge of the mop head and folded the other side over the wreath form, attaching them edge to edge, making sure the seam is on the back side of the wreath. I continued to repeat this step until I had the wreath form completely covered with all 4 pieces. I did have to squish the mop heads down around the wreath form so that it had more of a wreath shape. To help shape the wreath a little more and for a little added security, I took some twine and wrapped it around the wreath and tied it in a knot, and then continued to wrap it around the wreath in large sections and secured it with a double knot once I got back to where I started wrapping it and cut off the excess twine. Then, to decorate the wreath, I used this white snow owl that I had in my stash and this winter pick that I got on sale at Hobby Lobby. I used some pliers to remove the wire pick from the bottom of the owl and applied a generous amount of hot glue to the bottom and placed it in the center of the wreath on the bottom. Next, I cut off 2 pieces of the flocked pine from the pick and used hot glue to attach them to the bottom of the wreath right underneath the owl, facing in opposite directions. The greenery wasn't wanting to lay flat against the wreath, so I took 2 zip ties and used them to secure the tips of the greenery to the wreath on both sides. To finish up this wreath, I took one of the leftover large pine cones from the last project and used a generous amount of hot glue to attach it to the bottom of the wreath on top of the greenery. And then I found part of a red berry pick and hot glued it to the bottom of the wreath form across from the pine cone. All that was left to do was to place the wreath on the new wreath holder, and this project is done. This project turned out just how I envisioned it in my head, and I could not be happier with it. I can't wait to use this mini wreath holder throughout the seasons and holidays. Now I have an excuse to make some adorable mini wreaths. Here is a look at the before and after of this project. Today's video is part of the Vintage Decor Thrift Flip collab that I am participating in along with these other 5 incredibly talented ladies. All of these ladies never cease to amaze me with all the gorgeous DIY projects they create. If y'all haven't checked out their channels, I highly recommend doing so. Y'all won't be disappointed. I will leave a link to their channels as well as a link to the Vintage Decor playlist in the description box below, so be sure to go check them out once you're finished with my video. Now let's go ahead and jump into project number 4. I found these 2 galvanized planters at the local thrift store for $3. I cleaned them up really well with soap and water and took them outside and gave them 2 coats of Krylon Fusion spray paint in the color gloss white. Once the paint was dry, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color Snow White and gave both planters 2 thick coats for some added texture and to get rid of the glossy finish. After the paint was dry, I used Krylon antiquing wax in the color Dark Vintage and painted over the lion heads on the sides of the planters. When I had the antiquing wax all over the lion head, I took a paper towel and wiped off the excess. Next, I took the wax and painted the feet on each of the planters, again wiping off the excess wax. Once that was done, I took the antiquing wax and went across the entire planter in random spots and wiped off the excess so that it looked aged and distressed. I applied more wax to the corners and edges so that they would be a little more aged than the rest of the planter. This is what the planters looked like once I was finished with the antiquing wax. Then, to finish off this project, I took some twine and wrapped it around the little rings that the lions were holding in their mouth using hot glue to secure it in place, and then went around the heads of the lions to give it a more finished look. Here is how they turned out once the rings were wrapped and the twine was around the lions' heads. I did go ahead and use a candle lighter to burn off any of the twine fuzzies for a more aged and rustic look. Once I had the twine on the planters, I added some winter florals, and this one is all finished. I'm not sure these are classified as farmhouse per se, but I absolutely love them and they fit right in with the rest of my decor. These can be switched out for the different holidays and seasons as well. Here is a look at the before and after for these planters. Let's jump into my favorite from this video, project number 5. I found this clock at the local Goodwill on sale for half price. I started by cleaning it up really well to get rid of all the dust. I flipped the clock over and removed all the screws holding it in the stand and then to the back of the clock face so that I could take it apart. Once I had the screws removed, I went ahead and disassembled the clock so that I had just the stand and the frame. I then took a sanding sponge and sanded the plastic just enough to get rid of the shine. I gave the base and the front of the clock 2 coats of Krylon chalky finish paint in the color Classic White. Once that was dry, I took some Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and a small sponge pouncer and used it to give the pieces a distressed and worn look. I continued to add paint until I was happy with the way it looked. Next, I took the clock face and removed all the hardware, setting it aside so that I could reassemble it later. With the clock parts removed, I used a heat tool to loosen up the background paper and removed it from the back of the clock face. I used this piece of scrapbook paper with cotton stems on it from Michael's to replace the background of the clock. I used the background that I had removed from the clock face as a guide to measure out how big of a square I needed to cut from the paper and traced it out with a pencil and cut it out. I used a regular Elmer's School glue stick to adhere the scrapbook paper to the face of the clock. I found this to be the least messy and the fastest way to adhere scrapbook paper to most surfaces. Next, I cut this square Roman numeral clock face out of some black permanent vinyl using my Cricut and applied it on top of the scrapbook paper using a transfer tape that wasn't super sticky so that it would not tear the scrapbook paper or lift it up. I did not make this file. I actually purchased it from Etsy, and I will leave a link in the description box below. When the glue was dry, I reassembled the clock face by replacing the motor and the hands in the reverse order of how I removed them. Next, I cleaned the glass and placed it back inside the plastic cover, followed by the clock face and replaced the screws. Then I placed the clock back onto the stand and replaced the back piece, securing it in place with the screws. To finish this project, I added a AA battery, and this one is finished. I'm beyond thrilled with how this clock turned out. It is hands down my favorite from today's projects and one of my all-time favorites. Here is a look at the before and after of the clock. And last but not least, DIY number 6. I was lucky enough to find this large cheese box at a local flea market for $2.50, so I just couldn't pass it up. It had some wax inside the box and some pretty rough areas around the edges, so I used a heat tool to remove the wax and a sanding sponge to smooth out all of the rough areas. I then used Krylon chalky finished antiquing wax in the color dark vintage and stained the entire box inside and out. I absolutely love the color this wax gave to the box. Once the wax was completely dry, I flipped the box over and took 4 of these metal chess pieces that I had picked up at a garage sale a couple years ago and used hot glue to attach them to the bottom of the box for some feet. I chose to use hot glue since I wanted to be able to take them off in the future in case I wanted to repurpose the box. Next, I flipped the box back over and used hot glue to attach this metal handle that I had in my stash from a previous project. I believe I picked it up at Hobby Lobby, but I'm not 100% sure. Again, I used hot glue since I may want to remove the handle later, and it's just really a decorative piece and not meant to be used as an actual handle. I cut the ends off the 4 screws that came with the handle and used hot glue to secure them in place inside the holes so that it looked like it was actually screwed into the lid of the box, and this one is finished. I am super happy with how this storage box turned out. I'm not really sure where I'm going to put it yet or what I'm going to put in it, but I'm sure it'll be in the living room so that it's able to be seen. Here's a look at the before and after of this cheese box. Here is one final look at all 6 of today's Farmhouse thrift flip pieces. I absolutely love how all these turned out. I love that I was able to flip these everyday thrifting finds into beautiful pieces of home decor that can also be switched out for the different holidays and seasons. Which one of these projects is your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. Mine definitely has to be the clock. It turned out exactly how I had it pictured in my head, but then again, the matchstick holder has a special place too. I want to thank each and every one of you for stopping by, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up as it really does help me out here on YouTube. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, what are you waiting for? Click that button and stick around for a while. I have tons of fun projects on the way. Also, please don't forget to check out the Vintage Decor Thrift Flip Collab playlist that I left in the description box below. I'll see y'all next time.